You're not overly sensitive. You're not broken. You're rare. But the world has never tolerated that. They prefer to call you weak because your conscience exposes their mediocrity. Carl Jung knew less than 5% carry this calling, and those few have always been persecuted, silenced, crushed. The truth, you're not a flaw. You're living proof that humanity is still in its infancy. And if you feel this in your skin, sign up now, because no one will caress you here. Here you'll hear what hurts, and if you can't handle it, it's because you were never ready to carry the weight of your own soul. From an early age, you felt there was something wrong with carrying so much weight inside your chest. While others seemed to dance on the surface, you sank too deep. The silence cut you, the superficial words suffocated you, and every blank stare felt like a cruel reminder you didn't fit. Carl Jung called this a sign of a consciousness that isn't content with narrow frames, but society doesn't understand this density. They say you're exaggerated, too sensitive, too complicated, and you believed them. You spent years trying to shrink yourself, molding the body of your soul to fit into shallow boxes. But what you call a defect is actually the call of an evolving consciousness, something few touch. Think if Newton had given up because they said he was strange, if Van Gogh had stifled his intensity to simply be normal. The pain of difference isn't a curse, it's a map. It's just that no one handed you the compass. And this is where the dilemma begins. Will you continue to convince yourself that it is a defect, or will you accept that perhaps that is exactly where the self that the world still cannot stand lives? Life made you believe that the wound of difference needed to be hidden. But you didn't realize that this same wound is an opening, a portal that only a few cross. Jung knew those who feel out of place carry a rare awareness, capable of seeing beyond the masks. But the price is high. In the school hallways, at family dinners, at work where everyone repeats pre-made phrases, you feel the weight of not belonging. The wound of difference is the scar that reveals that you weren't born to copy, but to create. But the truth hurts. No one will applaud the stranger at first. Applause only comes when time proves the stranger was a visionary. And until then, you must walk alone. It is in this internal exile that the independence you have achieved is born, but it's still too early to talk about it. First, you need to face this uncomfortable question. How long will you keep trying to be like them, knowing that it kills something inside you every day? The burden of difference is brutal because it not only isolates you, it confronts you with the loneliness of being who you are. This is where the paradox comes in. The world tells you to be the same, but your conscience won't allow it. Carl Jung called this the inevitable conflict between the persona and the self. You wear masks to survive, but deep down you know the mask is your prison. And the more you try to fit in, the more you feel like you're betraying something sacred within yourself. It's like carrying a melody no one hears, a call that echoes in your gut. You can even pretend, but the melody keeps playing. This is why so many drown in compulsions, trying to numb the pain of not fitting in. But there is a turning point, realizing that the wound of difference doesn't make you weak, it makes you necessary. And if you've identified with it so far, wait, because the wound will take on new forms when we talk about emotion as a symphony, where feeling ceases to be weakness and reveals itself as the first key to consciousness. Most people feel like someone listening to a crackling radio. Everything shallow, everything muffled, everything too fast. Not you. Within you, each emotion explodes like an entire orchestra, a visceral concerto that doesn't ask permission to play. Carl Jung called these affective complexes, and he knew that this intensity isn't a maladjustment, it's psychic sophistication. But the world can't stand those who feel so much. They call them exaggerated, overly emotional, dramatic. But the truth is, your consciousness operates on a different frequency. When someone walks into a room, you don't just notice the smile, you notice the hidden crack in their eyes, the pause in their tone of voice, the silence that betrays a shadow. Your spirituality is permeated by this gift because feeling for you was never a choice, it was a calling. The problem is, if you don't learn to conduct this symphony, it becomes noise that consumes you. The intensity that could be your gateway becomes compulsion, anxiety, a prison. Feeling deeply is like carrying a double-edged blade. On one side, you touch the beauty no one else perceives. A sunset isn't just color, it's a dive into eternity. A song isn't just melody, it's memory, wound, and rebirth in the same chord. But on the other side, feeling this way also makes you bleed where no one else bleeds. The pains the world ignores tear at your skin. The injustices most people swallow burn you from within. This is why so many intense people end up numbing their own consciousness. Alcohol, food, endless distractions, anything to silence the orchestra. But Jung warned, to suffocate the symphony is to suffocate the self. The solution isn't to silence feeling, but to learn to transmute. This requires the courage to look within and accept that your tears aren't weakness, but codes. What you call excess is actually the secret language of your soul trying to remind you of what the world has forgotten. Think about it. When was the last time you allowed yourself to feel without fear of being judged? The whole world chases distractions, but you know you weren't born to live numb. Your conscience craves intensity, depth, silence to listen to its own symphony. Want a practical example? Instead of running away from your emotions, write about them, paint, dance, transform them into art. Pick up books like Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet, or delve into the pages of Stendhal's The Red and the Black, authors who knew how to transform torment into beauty. It's not about being an artist, but about giving form to what most abandon in the dark. Because if you don't give voice to your emotions, they become shadows, and a repressed shadow becomes a prison. That's why, if up until now your life has seemed like a burden of feeling too much, wait until the next point, sacred curiosity, which shows that the same intensity you feel in your heart is also the blade that can cut through the world's illusions. Ever since you were little, you realized that ready-made answers never nourished you. While everyone accepted it's this way because it's always been, you felt the nausea of the hidden lie. Carl Jung called this active awareness, a gaze that isn't satisfied with the superficial. It's what I call sacred curiosity, this hunger to traverse the obvious, to tear off the world's mask and ask what no one dares. But there's a price. Those who ask too many questions are annoying. Those who insist on why harm the comfort of collective ignorance. Have you noticed? When you question traditions, beliefs, and relationships that don't make sense, a heavy silence fills the room. People don't want depth, they want anesthesia. But your spirituality doesn't leave you quiet. It's a calling that forces you to see cracks in every wall the world paints. The problem is, if you don't learn to deal with this gaze, you can feel cursed by your own lucidity. Sacred curiosity isn't a hobby, it's destiny. It's what drives you to sleepless nights, immersing yourself in books, philosophies, religions, trying to decipher what pulses behind appearances. While others are satisfied with novels, you devour Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, and Jung. While others distract themselves at parties, you prefer a conversation about emptiness and the self. This isn't alienation, it's evolution. But living with this perspective is dangerous. Asking too many questions tears away veils, and torn veils reveal shadows. This is why so many feel uncomfortable around you. Your mere presence reminds them of how much they betrayed themselves by accepting less than they deserved. This curiosity is the same blade that can liberate or destroy. If you use it against yourself, you lose yourself in paranoia, in doubts that never close. If you use it consciously, you become an architect of new realities, someone who opens doors no one knew existed. But tell me, how many times have you been called complicated, intense, too philosophical? How many times have you heard that thinking too much drives you crazy? They haven't realized that what they call excess is actually the compass that guides you toward individuation. Jung said that the mind that questions is the same one that evolves. And here's the thing, sacred curiosity isn't just about asking, but acting on the answer. Want a practical exercise? Every time a question haunts you, write it down and then write down 3 possible answers. Not to find the truth, but to train your mind to expand consciousness. This simple habit can transform chaos into a path. But this practice requires something brutal, the courage to be alone with your questions. Because the truth is, most people won't bear to walk this road with you. And it is precisely in this desert that the next point emerges. Achieved independence, when you realize that solitude is not a prison, but a sacred territory for building the self. There comes a time when you realize no one will come to save you. The applause you expected will never come. The embrace you idealized doesn't exist. That's when the independence you've conquered is born, not as a sweet choice, but as a brutal blow from life. Carl Jung said that the self only emerges when the persona falls apart, when the masks no longer sustain the pretense. And you know this firsthand. You learned that depending on the validation of others is like drinking seawater. The more you drink, the thirstier you get. You trusted, surrendered, molded yourself until you realized that every time you expected from others, you lost yourself. Then suddenly, something inside you lifted off the ground. It was hard, it was lonely, but it was real. Consciousness awakened to the most uncomfortable truth. Being alone is less painful than living surrounded and empty. And this solitude, when accepted, becomes sacred ground. It is there that the self whispers and spirituality becomes ground. Independence isn't empty rebellion, it's the conquest of inner territory. It's looking back and realizing how many times you've allowed yourself to be trapped in relationships, jobs, and families, simply out of fear of not knowing how to navigate life alone. But life burns these bridges on purpose. You can call it loss, you can call it betrayal, but Jung would call it a process of individuation. When you stop begging for love, you start generating love. When you stop begging for recognition, you start recognizing yourself. This is the paradox. Achieved independence doesn't isolate you, it restores you. It's like breaking out of a glass prison. It looked beautiful on the outside, but on the inside, it suffocated you. Want practical examples? Stop asking others if you're on the right path. Write your own list of priorities and execute them. Stop expecting others to understand you. Read, meditate, walk alone. Try books like Meditations by Marcus Aurelius or The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, which teach that inner strength is worth more than any external approval. The independence you've achieved is the silence that once frightened you and now becomes your greatest weapon. You no longer run from solitude, you transform it into a sanctuary. And here's the truth no one wants to face. When you learn to stand on your own, nothing can bring you down. This strength frightens because it reveals the lie of those still bound by invisible chains. That's why, when you begin to be self-sufficient, many turn away. Your freedom exposes their imprisonment, and that's okay. This purification of the path isn't punishment, it's natural selection of the soul. You don't lose, you purify. And it's precisely in this state of consciousness that the next cut occurs, when your vision begins to see beyond the obvious, when intuition becomes a sharp knife, revealing what's hidden, even when everyone swears it doesn't exist. This is where the consciousness that sees too much is born. Have you ever noticed how impossible it is to unsee what has already been revealed? Once your consciousness awakens, there is no turning back. You enter a room and don't just see the walls. You feel the tension in the bodies, the heavy silence, the shadow no one names. Carl Jung called this intuition, a perception that comes from the unconscious and pierces the veil of appearance. For others, a smile is enough. For you, a smile is just a mask, and the wound behind it screams louder. This sensitivity is a gift, but also a curse if not protected, because seeing too much means carrying pain that isn't yours. You absorb environments, sense when lies are in the air, perceive what no one says. This makes you an unintentional counselor, an involuntary therapist, a refuge for broken souls. But in the silence of the night, you ask yourself, who holds the weight I hold? Who reads my shadows when I spend my life deciphering those of others? An overseeing consciousness is like having X-ray vision into the human soul. The problem is, this vision has no off button. You detect micro-expressions, sense energy shifts, perceive hidden intentions. To the world, this is paranoia. To Jung, it's a rare degree of psychic sensitivity. And if you don't learn to filter, you end up drained. It's like being a lightning rod in the midst of emotional storms. Everything falls on you. That's why so many like you live tired, exhausted, as if carrying an invisible burden. Want a practical example? Try establishing protective rituals. It can be simple, writing before bed to release what isn't yours, practicing meditation with a focus on breathing only what belongs to you, using silent walks as a way to discharge excess. This isn't whimsy, it's psychic survival. If you don't, your spirituality becomes a prison, and the calling becomes just another impossible weight to bear. The most painful thing about seeing too much is realizing that often you see what others deny to death. You point out the shadow, they laugh at you. You feel the emptiness, they call you negative. You see the betrayal before it happens. They say you're making it up. But when the truth explodes, you're too tired to celebrate. This is where the brutal question arises. How long will you allow your vision to destroy you instead of guide you? Carl Jung believed that this gift only finds meaning when aligned with the self. Otherwise, it becomes an open wound. The difference between enlightenment and madness is the conscious use of your sensitivity, and it is precisely on this fine line that you discover the next portal, the thirst for meaning. Because seeing is not enough. You must transform this vision into direction. And when you understand that you were not born to live by appearances, the visceral search for something greater that can give a name to your pain begins. There's a hunger that nothing material can satisfy. You've tried, you've bought, you've conquered, you've collected applause, but in the silence your soul remains empty. It's the thirst for meaning. Carl Jung said that the self rebels when we live against our own nature. And you know, every time you tried to fit into pre-made scripts, you felt the nausea of inner betrayal. While the world chases titles, you ask, what's the point? While everyone celebrates shallow victories, you feel an echo of emptiness that no one acknowledges. This isn't whimsy, it's consciousness in a state of rebellion. It's spirituality at war with superficiality. And this call won't go away. The more you try to ignore it, the more it corrodes you. Because life may offer distractions, but the self demands truth. The thirst for meaning is the brutal reminder that living without purpose is dying in installments. This search makes you a stranger among strangers. Others seem content with banal conversations, automatic jobs, soulless relationships. You try to convince yourself that you should be happy too, but inside you something screams. Jung called these neurotic symptoms the psyche protesting against a lack of authenticity. That's why you felt that emptiness after achieving something everyone called great. That's why you've smiled in photos, but inside you cried. The thirst for meaning isn't an enemy, it's a compass. But most people prefer to silence it with noise. Alcohol, sex, consumption, endless distractions. You can keep numbing it, but know this. This thirst always returns, and stronger each time. Want a practical path? Stop looking for answers outside and start digging within. Write down painful questions, meditate in silence, read works like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. The thirst never goes away, but it can become a driving force. And here's the truth no one told you. This thirst is dangerous, because when you decide to follow it, your life begins to crumble. Everything that was an illusion shatters. Friendships that were sustained by superficiality fall apart. Jobs that only paid the bills lose their meaning. Relationships that lack depth crumble. And yes, it hurts. But this pain is childbirth. It's the price of authenticity. Carl Jung believed that the path to individuation is lonely because most never dare to drink from this water. But if you have the courage to honor your thirst, you discover something that changes everything. Emptiness is not the enemy. It is fertile ground. It is in this dry ground that transformation is born. And when you accept the loss of everything that lacks substance, you begin to experience psychic deaths and rebirths that prepare you for the next cut. That of leaving behind old versions of yourself, even when the world begs you to remain who you are no longer. Have you ever noticed how growing up hurts like dying? Because deep down, that's it. Each advance in consciousness requires burying a part of you. Carl Jung called this process psychological death and rebirth. The persona falls, the self emerges. But it's not beautiful poetry, it's a brutal rupture. Friendships that seemed eternal rot before your eyes. Families who swore love reveal they only loved the domesticated version of you. Relationships crumble because they were built on unresolved shadows. And you find yourself there, amid the rubble, trying to understand if you've lost or if you've finally freed yourself. That's the irony. Evolving hurts more than being trapped. But in the silence of the fall, you begin to feel that the void is also a portal. The psychological tomb is, in fact, a secret nursery where new versions are born. The problem? Almost no one has the courage to die in order to be reborn. These deaths aren't just symbolic, they have concrete effects. You leave the stable job that drained your soul and are called crazy. You end a relationship for no apparent reason and are accused of being insensitive. You cut ties with old friends and are labeled ungrateful. But deep down, you know, continuing would be self-murder. Carl Jung said that life's greatest tragedy is living what isn't yours, and you no longer accept living borrowed lives. These deaths are painful because they strip away your identity. Suddenly, you are no longer who others knew you. And this bothers you because the world prefers the old version, more predictable, easier to manipulate. But there's no going back. You can even pretend, but the awakened consciousness never sleeps. And if you don't surrender to the call, you fall ill. Depression, anxiety, emptiness, symptoms of those who have tried to stop the natural cycle of rebirth. Every psychological death is a symbolic mutilation, but it's also an invitation to authenticity. Think, how many times did you need to break down to realize you were living a lie? How many times was the end actually a beginning in disguise? Look back. All the losses you thought you couldn't bear were actually cleansings. It's the universe ripping out what no longer serves you, even if you scream. And here's the thing, each time you are reborn, you are born more aligned with the self, closer to a spirituality that doesn't depend on dogma, more aware of your strength. But this process never ends. Life is a cycle of deaths and rebirths, and each time you re-emerge, your presence becomes rarer, more transformative. And it's at this point that the wound becomes a tool, because the next cut reveals something even deeper. The transformative presence, the silent power to heal simply by being who you are. There are people who change the atmosphere when they enter, not by what they say, but by who they are. You may have noticed this in yourself. The room grows denser, someone bursts into tears out of nowhere, secrets come to light without your asking. This isn't coincidence. It's transformative presence. Carl Jung said that when two personalities meet, both are altered. In your case, the simple fact of existing authentically already acts as a catalyst. It's as if your consciousness were a mirror no one can avoid. Spirituality permeates you, and anyone who crosses your path is forced to look at their own shadow. But this power comes at a price. You become a therapist for broken souls without even wanting to. And if you don't learn to control it, you end up drained, exhausted, and drained. Because your light isn't for everyone, and your presence isn't a cure for every wound. This is where discernment becomes survival. What few understand is that transformative presence isn't manufactured, it's earned. It's born from the psychological deaths you've already experienced, from the silence in which you learn to rebuild yourself. It's the result of carrying scars without being ashamed of them. That's why, when you listen to someone, they feel like they're not being judged, they're being seen. Jung called this psychic space, the ability to hold another's truth without destroying it. But be careful. When you give this space to everyone, you lose ground yourself. It's like opening your home to strangers every day. Before long, there's no room left for you. Want practical examples? Set clear boundaries. If someone only shows up to vent their pain, ask what they'll do with what they brought. If someone seeks advice, say you only share when you feel reciprocity. Spirituality requires surrender, but it also requires protection. Your presence is both a knife and a cure. A knife because it cuts through the illusions others carry. It heals because it opens space for truth to flourish. But remember, even healing, when given in excess, becomes poison. Carl Jung warned of the danger of messianism, believing your calling is to save everyone. This destroys you and saves no one. Your mission is not to be the repository of collective pain, but to choose where your energy generates real transformation. Think about it. Who today has access to your presence? Who truly deserves to drink from this source? The consciousness you carry is too rare to be wasted on those who don't want to change. And it is precisely this rarity that opens the next portal. The invisible call, that persistent feeling that there is a greater purpose waiting, even when you can't yet name it. There's something that haunts you in the silence, a whisper that won't go away, a restlessness that won't go away. You may even try to live like others, but there's always an emptiness reminding you. This isn't all. Carl Jung called this impulse the transcendent function, the force that pushes consciousness beyond what's visible. You sense a purpose, but you can't name it. It's like carrying a compass without a map. You know you should walk, but you don't know where. This invisible call is uncomfortable because it puts you at odds with normality. While everyone else seems content with banal routines, you feel like you're wasting something immense within yourself. It's spirituality in its raw form, a pulse that demands surrender. But to ignore this call is to condemn yourself to illnesses of the soul. Anxiety, depression, that corrosive feeling of living a life that isn't yours. The invisible call doesn't appear as a clear voice, it appears as discomfort. It's the dissatisfaction that accompanies you even in moments that should be happy. It's the butterflies in your stomach when you stray from what feels true. It's your conscience screaming between the lines of everyday life. You were born for more. And here's the trap. You can spend your entire life trying to silence this call with distractions, but it always returns. Carl Jung said that when the soul finds no expression, it creates symptoms. How many times have you felt exhausted for no apparent reason? How many times have you cried without knowing why? It's the internal pressure of a purpose that wasn't lived. Want practical examples? Start with small acts of alignment, studying something that truly moves you, connecting with people who vibrate at the same intensity, dedicating time to what expands your consciousness. Every step, no matter how small, is a response to the call. This calling isn't about fame, money, or recognition. It's about aligning your life with the self, with what Carl Jung called the totality of the psyche. When you resist, you feel lost. When you obey, even without understanding, a silent peace begins to emerge. But this path is dangerous because it distances you from collective security. You may lose relationships, opportunities, the approval of all. But what you gain is non-negotiable. Authenticity, awareness, embodied spirituality. The invisible calling is the spark that connects you to what Jung believed to be the future of humanity. Individuals who dare to be rare, even when the world insists on mediocrity. And if you already recognize this strength within yourself, prepare yourself. Because the next step isn't just hearing the call, it's bearing the responsibility of rarity. And this responsibility weighs like a cross, but also illuminates like a torch. Being rare isn't a medal, it's a sentence. Carl Jung warned, the greater the consciousness, the greater the shadow it casts. You weren't given these gifts to inflate your ego, but to carry a weight few can bear. The responsibility of rarity is learning that your intensity doesn't make you better, only more responsible. Your vision isn't a privilege, it's a burden. Because seeing beyond also means seeing the rottenness others pretend doesn't exist. It means confronting lies no one dares touch, and if you lack courage, you become an accomplice. Spirituality isn't a stage for vanity. It's an arena for war against unconsciousness. When you try to use your sensitivity to feel superior, you're not rare, you're just inflated. When you believe you were born to save everyone, you're not a guide, you're a condemned martyr. The self demands balance, knowing when to illuminate and when to retreat, when to speak and when to remain silent. The responsibility of rarity also appears in relationships. People will approach you for two reasons, either to drain your light or to extinguish it. Carl Jung called this projection, they see in you what they deny in themselves. Some will treat you like a guru, expecting you to carry burdens that were never yours. Others will try to diminish you because your very existence betrays their mediocrity. The challenge is discernment. It's choosing who deserves access to your consciousness. It's realizing that not everyone can handle your transformative presence, and that's okay. You weren't made to please, but to be authentic. Want practical examples? Ask yourself, does this person grow with me or diminish me? Does this relationship nourish me or drain me? If the answer is the latter, have the courage to withdraw. This isn't coldness, it's spiritual responsibility. Protecting your energy is part of the calling, because without it, you can't bear the weight of your own rarity. And here lies the open wound. You can no longer live as if you were ordinary, because you are not. Your conscience doesn't allow it, your spirituality doesn't accept it. Carl Jung believed that rare people like you are bridges between the unconscious and the conscious, between shadow and light, between past and future. And every bridge carries the weight of what it crosses. That's why you sometimes feel crushed. But remember, the burden is not a punishment, it's a duty. Your mission is not to convince the world of who you are, but to embody your truth until the world can no longer ignore it. The responsibility of rarity is to be faithful to the calling even when no one understands, to carry your cross without expecting applause. And if you recognize yourself in these words up to this point, know this: there is no rest, because with each step, life will demand more courage from you. And the real cut comes now, when all this needs to be thrown onto a hook that tears from the start and leaves no room for escape. And now tell me, how long will you continue pretending to be ordinary? How long will you hide your calling, suffocate yourself, bury your conscience just to fit into the emptiness of others? Carl Jung knew to ignore your own rarity is to condemn yourself to a living death. So look deep within and answer, will you continue betraying yourself, or will you assume the weight of your own evolution? If this tore you apart inside, sign up now, because this was just the first cut.